Lakota war chief's prisoner becomes his greatest weakness. Then she does the unthinkable. Tall grasses swayed gently in the wind, whispering secrets of the land that had witnessed generations of life, struggle, and survival. The air was fresh and cool, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of rivers flowing. This was the home of the Lakota people, a place of freedom, beauty, and deep traditions. In this land, every person had a role, every story had meaning, and every decision could ripple through the lives of the tribe. Teyanita, the Lakota war chief, moved with quiet confidence among his people. His tall figure cast a long shadow over the ground as he walked, his eyes scanning the horizon with a mixture of alertness and thoughtfulness. Teyanita was known for his courage, his sharp mind, and the respect he commanded from both his tribe and rivals. He had led his people through difficult times, protecting them from dangers that threatened their way of life. Yet despite his strength, there was a part of him that few had ever seen, a part that longed for understanding, connection, and the rare moments of peace that life in the plains allowed. On this particular day, the tribe was preparing for a journey across the plains. Supplies had been gathered, horses readied, and warriors positioned strategically to ensure safety. The purpose of the journey was not conquest, but necessity. The tribe needed to gather resources, strengthen alliances, and maintain the delicate balance that allowed them to thrive in a world that was constantly changing. Every detail mattered. Every decision was carefully considered. Among the people moving with purpose was a young woman named Mika. She did not belong to the Lakota tribe. She came from a neighboring village, known for its vibrant community and rich traditions. Mika was not an ordinary young woman. She had grown up learning to observe, to listen, and to understand the world around her. From a young age, she had been curious about the lives of others, the stories of those she met, and the lessons hidden in everyday moments. Her eyes held a spark of intelligence and courage that made her different, yet in her village, she was respected for her wisdom and kindness. Fate, however, had other plans for Mika. During a skirmish between the Lakota warriors and a group from her village, she found herself caught in circumstances beyond her control. The clash was brief but intense, and in the chaos, Mika was taken captive. Unlike many others who had been captured in the past, Mika did not panic. She did not cry out or beg. Instead, she remained calm, her mind racing with thoughts, strategies, and observations. She understood that in order to survive, she needed to be aware of every detail, every movement, and every expression around her. When Teyanita first saw Mika, he was intrigued. She did not appear frightened, nor did she display any signs of submission. Instead, she looked at him with steady eyes, as if trying to see beyond the surface, trying to understand the man who held her fate in his hands. There was something about her presence that felt different. Most prisoners showed fear, desperation, or anger. Mika showed none of these. She showed something else entirely: awareness, courage, and a quiet strength that immediately caught the chief's attention. Teyanita studied her silently for several moments, trying to read her intentions. He had learned over the years that appearances could be deceiving, that people could hide motives behind masks of calmness or fear. But Mika's presence was undeniable. It demanded attention, and it sparked a curiosity that Teyanita could not ignore. He noticed the way she held herself, the subtle way her eyes took in the surroundings, and the faint, confident tilt of her head that suggested she was thinking, always thinking. The days that followed were a careful dance of observation and interaction. Mika was kept under watch, yet she was allowed small freedoms within the camp. She helped with tasks when asked, not out of obedience, but as a way to understand her captors better. She spoke when necessary, offering insights that were often unexpectedly helpful. Slowly, Teyanita began to see her not just as a prisoner, but as someone capable of understanding the complexities of leadership and life. He found himself listening to her opinions, noticing patterns and ideas he had not considered before. At first, the other warriors were skeptical. They had seen captives before, and they knew the danger of allowing a prisoner to gain influence. They whispered among themselves, questioning why the chief seemed to trust Mika in small ways. Yet, Tayanita remained patient. He observed her carefully, testing her reactions, noting her honesty, and quietly appreciating the sharpness of her mind. Over time, even the warriors began to see that there was something extraordinary about her. Mika, on her part, never took advantage of the trust she was given. She understood the balance she needed to maintain. She did not flaunt her intelligence or seek power, but she used her observations to navigate the camp, to help where she could, and to learn from the people around her. She saw the strength in Tayanita, but also the weight he carried as a leader responsible for the lives of his tribe. She began to respect him not just for his authority, but for his humanity, the moments of vulnerability he tried to hide, and the care he showed for those he led. Evenings in the camp were filled with quiet reflection. The fire burned brightly in the center, casting long, flickering shadows on the faces of those gathered around it. Stories were shared, songs sung, and traditions observed. Mika listened intently, absorbing the culture, the history, and the lessons that had been passed down through generations. She asked questions, not out of defiance, but from genuine curiosity. Tayanita noticed this, and he found himself answering in ways he had never spoken to a prisoner before. He shared stories of battles, of loss, and of victories. He spoke of his responsibilities, his fears, and his hopes for the future. A subtle bond began to form, one built on observation, respect, and mutual understanding. It was not friendship in the traditional sense, nor was it romantic. It was something quieter, deeper, and more powerful. Tayanita began to see Mika as a mirror, reflecting both the strengths and weaknesses within himself. She challenged him in ways no one else could, not by words alone, but by her presence, her courage, and her intelligence. As the days passed, the landscape around them seemed to mirror the change in the camp. The plains remained vast and wild, yet within the boundaries of the tribe, something new was growing. Trust was forming in unlikely places. Strength was being recognized not just in warriors, but in a young woman who had been brought into the camp as a prisoner. And Tayanita, the mighty war chief, began to feel an unfamiliar sensation, an openness to change, a willingness to see the world through someone else's eyes, and an awareness that his greatest challenges might come not from outside threats, but from the unexpected connections he allowed to grow within his own heart. By the end of this period, Mika was no longer just a captive. She had become an observer, a helper, and quietly, a teacher. She had shown the value of patience, courage, and wisdom. And Tayanita, for the first time in many years, felt a mixture of pride, respect, and curiosity, emotions he had rarely allowed himself to experience. The story of their meeting was only beginning, but it was clear that this encounter would change the course of their lives forever. In the quiet moments before sleep, Tayanita would often think of her, wondering what she was observing at that very moment, what thoughts ran through her mind, and how a single presence could unsettle even the strongest of leaders. And Mika, lying in her small space among the tents, would think of him as well, not with fear but with careful attention, noting his habits, his reactions, and the glimpses of humanity that peeked through his stern exterior. The plains had seen many stories unfold over the years, but this one was different. It was a story not just of power, battle, or survival. It was a story of understanding, connection, and the quiet beginnings of an unlikely bond. And as the first part of this journey came to a close, the stage was set for the events that would follow, events that would challenge beliefs, test courage, and ultimately reveal how a prisoner could become a force that even the mightiest war chief could not ignore. The days after Mika's arrival in the camp passed with a rhythm, both familiar and unusual. The warriors carried out their duties with steady focus, tending to horses, gathering food, and maintaining the defenses of the camp. The children played near the edges of the tents, their laughter echoing across the plains, a reminder of life continuing in the midst of uncertainty. The elders shared stories and teachings, guiding the younger members with patience and wisdom. Yet within this rhythm, Mika's presence began to make a subtle, yet undeniable difference. Unlike most prisoners who stayed quiet or resisted, Mika engaged herself carefully. She observed the daily routines, noted the interactions between people, and quietly assisted when she could. If a warrior struggled with a task, she offered advice in a gentle tone, never commanding, never overstepping. Her guidance, often unspoken, became a part of the camp's flow. The chief, Tayanita, noticed how the camp seemed smoother, how tensions eased slightly when she was near, and how decisions were often made more thoughtfully with her quiet input. It was during a morning when the sun had barely risen that Mika's influence became more apparent. The warriors were preparing to move to a nearby river to collect water and gather medicinal herbs. Tayanita noticed one of his younger warriors, a boy named Kiona, hesitating near the edge of the riverbank. Mika stepped forward, her movements calm and deliberate. She approached Kiona and offered a simple suggestion on how to cross a tricky patch of slippery stones. Kiona listened, followed her advice, and succeeded without injury. The chief watched silently, realizing that her presence had not only helped the boy but had prevented what could have been a serious accident. Over the following weeks, Mika's influence grew in ways that went beyond simple guidance. She asked questions about the decisions Tayanita made, inquiring about why certain actions were chosen over others. She listened carefully to his answers, occasionally offering insights that, while respectful, challenged him to think differently. At first, Tayanita was cautious, aware that her knowledge and observations might be used against him, but gradually he began to trust her judgment. Her intelligence was clear, but it was paired with patience, humility, and a genuine interest in understanding rather than manipulation. Mika's calm courage did not go unnoticed by the other warriors. At first, they were skeptical and wary. How could a prisoner, someone from outside their tribe, understand their ways or offer guidance? But over time, even the most cautious among them began to recognize her value. She would suggest improvements in how tasks were approached, point out risks that might have been overlooked, or quietly remind the chief of traditions and principles that were sometimes forgotten in the rush of daily life. Her contributions, small though they seemed, began to shift the atmosphere of the camp. Decisions were made with more thought, the tribe worked more cohesively, and conflicts were resolved with less tension. Despite the growing trust, Mika remained careful. She understood that her position was delicate. She did not try to manipulate the chief or the warriors. Instead, she relied on her observations, her intelligence, and her courage. She learned to communicate without overstepping, offering insights only when asked or when it was clear that her input could prevent harm. Tayanita admired this balance. It was rare to find someone so perceptive, so brave, and yet so restrained. In many ways, she reminded him of the leaders he had respected in his youth, those who combined wisdom with action and courage with careful thought. Evenings in the camp became moments of quiet reflection for both Tayanita and Mika. After the tasks of the day were completed, the warriors would gather around the fire, sharing stories of their experiences, the lessons learned, and the challenges faced. Mika listened intently, absorbing every word. She asked questions not to challenge, but to understand the perspectives of the tribe, their traditions, and the burdens they carried. Tayanita found himself speaking more openly in her presence than he had with anyone in years. He shared stories of his childhood, the lessons his parents had taught him, and the moments of doubt he had faced as a leader. One evening, as the firelight danced across the faces of those gathered, Tayanita spoke of a decision he had made during a past conflict. He had chosen a path that resulted in loss, but he had acted to protect the people he loved. His voice carried both authority and vulnerability, and Mika listened without interruption. When he finished, she offered a simple observation. You made the best choice you could with the knowledge you had. Courage is not the absence of mistakes, but the willingness to act despite them. The words were quiet, but they struck a chord within Tayanita. He realized that her understanding was not just intellectual. She had a deep sense of empathy and insight that allowed her to see the world in ways few could. As the days passed, the bond between them grew stronger, though it remained unspoken and subtle. Tayanita felt a growing respect for Mika, a recognition of her intelligence and bravery. He noticed the way she watched the camp, noting patterns, predicting challenges, and offering solutions in ways that were often overlooked by even the most experienced warriors. He began to rely on her advice in small matters first, then in larger decisions. And with each instance, he found himself trusting her more, feeling a rare sense of relief in knowing that he was not alone in carrying the weight of leadership. Mika, too, began to see Tayanita in a new light. She recognized the burden he carried, the constant vigilance required to lead a tribe, and the loneliness that often came with authority. She understood that his stern exterior hid a deep sense of responsibility, and she approached him with a combination of respect and empathy. She never sought to take advantage of his trust. Instead, she quietly offered guidance, shared observations, and encouraged thoughtful reflection. In doing so, she became more than a prisoner. She became a source of wisdom and insight that the chief had never anticipated. The other members of the tribe began to notice changes as well. Decisions were made with more care, conflicts were resolved with greater understanding, and the overall atmosphere of the camp became calmer and more focused. Mika's presence, once seen as a potential risk, was now recognized as a source of balance. Even the elders, who were initially cautious, began to see that her intelligence and courage were valuable assets. She had a way of speaking and acting that inspired confidence, not fear, and her influence quietly shaped the way the tribe functioned. Despite the growing bond, challenges remained. There were moments of tension, when the chief's advisors questioned the wisdom of allowing a prisoner to have influence, and when Mika herself struggled with the limitations of her position. She had to navigate a delicate balance between offering help and maintaining her safety, between showing courage and respecting the authority of the chief. Yet through these challenges, she remained steadfast, earning the respect of those around her through her actions and her careful judgment. One morning, a message arrived from a neighboring village. It spoke of a potential threat, a challenge that could affect the safety of the tribe. Tayanita called a meeting with his warriors, discussing the best course of action. Mika observed silently, noting the details, the strengths and weaknesses of each option. When asked for her input, she spoke clearly and thoughtfully, highlighting risks that others had overlooked and suggesting strategies that balanced caution with action. The chief listened, weighing her words carefully, and realized that her insights were not only accurate but invaluable. By the end of this period, Mika had moved from being a simple prisoner to becoming a quiet force within the camp. She did not seek recognition or power, but her intelligence, courage, and empathy had begun to influence the decisions of the tribe. Tayanita, too, had changed. He found himself considering perspectives he had never thought of, valuing input from someone outside his usual circle, and recognizing that strength could come from unexpected places. Their bond, though still unspoken, had grown into a foundation of trust, respect, and mutual understanding. The plains, wide and open under the endless sky, bore witness to this unusual connection. The winds carried the whispers of change, and the firelight in the evenings reflected the quiet growth of understanding between the chief and his prisoner. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. Mika had become more than a captive. She had become a companion in thought, a guide in decisions, and a source of courage that even the chief could not ignore. And Tayanita, the great war chief of the Lakota, had begun to feel something he had rarely experienced, a recognition that true strength was not only measured by skill in battle or authority over others, but by the ability to see value in those around him, even in the most unexpected of people. In Mika, he saw courage, wisdom, and insight, and in himself, he began to see a capacity for trust and respect that he had never fully embraced before. The story of their connection was still unfolding, but the first seeds had been planted. A bond built on understanding, respect, and quiet courage had begun to take root in the heart of the plains. And as the sun set behind the distant hills, casting a warm glow over the camp, it was clear that the events of the days to come would test them both, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately reveal the true strength that could emerge when respect and trust were given to those who deserved it. The days in the camp flowed with a mixture of routine and unpredictability. The plains remained vast and untamed, stretching endlessly under the ever-changing sky. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying both the promise of new beginnings and the reminders of past struggles. For Tayanita, the Lakota war chief, life had always been a careful balance of strength, vigilance, and responsibility. Every decision affected not only his own fate but the lives of everyone in the tribe. And now, with Mika's presence in the camp, that balance had begun to shift in ways he had never anticipated. Mika's role within the camp had grown steadily over the past weeks. What had begun as cautious observation and quiet assistance had evolved into subtle influence. She offered advice on practical matters, like the distribution of supplies, the tending of animals, and the care of the wounded. She suggested ways to improve the efficiency of daily routines, always with humility and respect, never seeking to assert power. And yet, despite her careful approach, Tayanita noticed that her input often carried weight. Decisions that once relied solely on his judgment now benefited from her insight, and the results were often better than he could have achieved alone. This growing influence, however, was not without conflict. Not everyone in the tribe welcomed her presence or her subtle guidance. Some of the warriors whispered doubts, questioning why the chief seemed to listen to a prisoner. "She is not of our people," one would say quietly to another. "How can she understand our ways, our traditions, our needs?" Others feared that trust in an outsider could lead to mistakes or even betrayal. Tayanita was aware of these murmurs, and though he did not dismiss them, he chose to observe rather than react. He had learned that leadership required both discernment and patience, and that sometimes the truth revealed itself in time. Mika, for her part, noticed the skepticism of the warriors. She understood that her position was delicate, and that one wrong word or action could undo the trust she had carefully built. She moved with a mixture of caution and confidence, contributing only when her observations were likely to help rather than cause conflict. She did not challenge authority, but she did not shy away from truth. Her courage lay not in defiance, but in the quiet conviction of her knowledge and her commitment to helping others, even in the midst of uncertainty. Tayanita found himself increasingly drawn to her perspective. He realized that her presence exposed not only the vulnerabilities in his own thinking, but also the potential for growth he had long ignored. Mika had a way of noticing things that others overlooked, the patterns in behavior, the subtle signs of tension, and the unspoken concerns of the tribe. She spoke with clarity and honesty, guiding without dictating, suggesting without imposing. And in doing so, she had become both a mirror and a compass for the chief, reflecting both his strengths and the areas where he could improve. One afternoon, a situation arose that tested both Mika's influence and the trust Tayanita had placed in her. A dispute had broken out between two warriors over a misunderstanding related to the division of resources. Voices grew raised, emotions flared, and the potential for physical conflict loomed. Tayanita, as the leader, could have intervened immediately with authority, but Mika stepped forward first. Calmly, she addressed both parties, asking them to explain their perspectives fully before reacting. She listened carefully, repeating each point to ensure understanding, and then guided the warriors toward a compromise that satisfied both sides. The resolution astonished the tribe. The warriors had expected punishment or anger, but Mika's approach had created understanding, respect, and cooperation. Tayanita watched silently, aware that her actions had not only solved the immediate problem but had also taught a valuable lesson to the entire camp. The chief felt a mixture of admiration and humility. He realized that her influence was growing not because of power or fear, but because of wisdom, patience, and the ability to inspire trust and respect. Despite these successes, Tayanita could not ignore the internal conflict that Mika's presence stirred within him. He had always prided himself on his strength, independence, and authority. He was accustomed to making decisions alone, relying on his experience, intuition, and judgment. Yet, with Mika's insights, he began to see the benefits of collaboration, of listening to perspectives outside his own. This recognition unsettled him. He felt a vulnerability he had not experienced before, a vulnerability born not of weakness but of connection. Mika, too, sensed the tension within the camp and within the chief. She understood that her influence, though growing, must be handled with care. She did not seek to replace authority, but to complement it. She approached Tayanita with respect, offering guidance when asked and speaking her mind only when necessary. She had learned to navigate the complex dynamics of trust, respect, and leadership, recognizing that her actions could shape not only the decisions of the chief, but also the perception of the tribe as a whole. The bond between them deepened in quiet moments. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Tayanita and Mika would sometimes find themselves near the campfire, talking softly about the events of the day. They shared observations, exchanged ideas, and reflected on the challenges they faced. Tayanita spoke of his responsibilities, the burden of leadership, and the difficult choices he had made in the past. Mika listened with empathy and insight, offering thoughtful observations that encouraged him to consider alternative perspectives and solutions. Over time, Tayanita began to notice subtle changes within himself. He found himself questioning assumptions he had long held, considering ideas he had previously dismissed, and valuing the input of someone who was not bound by tradition, experience, or expectation. Mika had become more than a prisoner. She was a source of insight, a guide, and a confidant. Her presence had opened his mind to new ways of thinking, and her courage had inspired him to confront his own vulnerabilities with honesty and humility. However, the growing bond did not go unnoticed by outsiders. Rumors of Mika's influence reached rival tribes, and whispers of potential betrayal began to circulate among those who did not understand the connection between the chief and his prisoner. Some feared that Tayanita's reliance on Mika could be exploited, that decisions influenced by her might weaken the tribe's position. These tensions added a layer of complexity to an already delicate situation. Tayanita was aware of the risks, yet he also recognized that the benefits of her guidance were too significant to ignore. Mika, aware of the scrutiny from others, continued to act with integrity. She did not seek recognition or favor, but instead focused on the well-being of the tribe and the careful guidance of the chief. Her courage lay not in defiance or bold action, but in her consistent wisdom, her empathy, and her ability to navigate the complexities of human relationships. Through her actions, she earned not only the respect of Tayanita but gradually the respect of many within the tribe. The challenges of leadership, however, were never far away. Tayanita faced difficult decisions each day, weighing the needs of the tribe against the realities of the world around them. Mika's guidance helped him consider options he might have overlooked, anticipate consequences, and approach problems with both strategy and compassion. Yet, the chief remained cautious, aware that dependence on another could create vulnerability. He had learned to trust Mika, but he also remained vigilant, balancing respect with caution, guidance with independence. One morning, Tayanita received news that a neighboring group was considering a move into territory that the tribe considered important for survival and resources. The news created tension among the warriors, some advocating for immediate action, others urging caution. Tayanita turned to Mika, asking for her perspective. She analyzed the situation carefully, weighing risks and benefits, and then presented a thoughtful plan that balanced caution with proactive steps. Her strategy minimized conflict while ensuring the safety of the tribe, and the chief recognized the brilliance of her approach. The success of her guidance further strengthened the bond between them, but also made the chief aware of the growing vulnerability her influence represented. Mika had become not only a trusted advisor but also a source of emotional connection, something he had long avoided as a leader. Her courage, intelligence, and insight had begun to affect his decisions, his emotions, and his perspective on leadership. Tayanita realized that his strength as a chief was now intertwined with her presence, making her both an invaluable ally and an unexpected source of personal vulnerability. Through these experiences, Mika and Tayanita came to understand each other more deeply. They recognized the balance between power and humility, strength and vulnerability, trust and caution. Their relationship was unique, rooted in respect, intelligence, and quiet courage. They did not need to speak of loyalty or affection. It was evident in their actions, their decisions, and the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. The plains, vast and ever-changing, seemed to reflect the transformation within the camp. Life continued with its usual challenges, but the influence of Mika and the evolving leadership of Tayanita brought a new sense of possibility, hope, and resilience. Their story was still unfolding, and the events that awaited them promised to test their courage, judgment, and trust in ways neither could fully predict. Yet one thing was certain: the connection they had formed would shape not only their own lives but the future of the tribe as well. The morning air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of the plains and the faint aroma of fires burning in distant camps. Life in Tayanita's tribe had settled into a rhythm that combined both preparation and vigilance. Yet, beneath this surface of daily activity, tension lingered, a tension that grew with the knowledge of rival groups watching the tribe from afar. The tranquility of the plains was fragile, and the leaders of the tribe knew that challenges could arrive at any moment. Mika moved quietly through the camp, observing the warriors as they carried out their morning duties. She had grown accustomed to this life, aware of the patterns, responsibilities, and subtle dynamics that shaped the tribe. Despite her initial status as a prisoner, she had become an integral part of the daily flow, not by force, but through insight, careful thought, and courage. She noticed when something was out of place, when a warrior hesitated, or when a plan might not work as intended. Her eyes, always watchful, captured details others often overlooked, making her presence a steady, guiding force in the camp. Tayanita, meanwhile, felt the growing weight of responsibility more acutely than ever. The presence of Mika had changed the way he approached decisions. He found himself considering perspectives he had previously ignored, thinking through consequences more carefully, and seeking insight beyond his own experience. Yet, with this growth came vulnerability. The chief understood that the trust he had placed in Mika, though invaluable, had the potential to become a weakness if misjudged or misunderstood. He felt a careful tension between reliance and caution, respect, and the necessity of maintaining authority. The day began like any other, with tasks assigned and responsibilities carried out. But as the sun climbed higher, news arrived that would alter the course of the tribe's routine. Scouts reported that a neighboring group, long known to the tribe, was preparing a movement toward the territory they shared. While the message did not indicate immediate aggression, the potential for conflict was undeniable. The warriors gathered to discuss strategies, voices raised in concern, and tensions rose as differing opinions were voiced. Some advocated for immediate action to prepare defenses, while others suggested cautious observation, wary of misjudging the intentions of the outsiders. Tayanita called for Mika to join the discussion. Her calm presence immediately drew attention, and the room quieted as she considered the situation. She asked questions, seeking clarity on the positions, motivations, and capabilities of both the rival group and the tribe. Her analysis was thoughtful, balancing caution with foresight. She suggested strategies that prioritized the safety of the tribe, the protection of resources, and the avoidance of unnecessary conflict. Her words were not commands but careful guidance, and they carried weight because of the clarity and insight behind them. The warriors listened, some with skepticism, others with growing respect. Tayanita weighed her suggestions carefully, comparing them with his own experience and the counsel of his advisors. He realized that her perspective added a new dimension to the decision-making process, one that combined strategic thinking with an understanding of human behavior. Her presence was shaping not only the choices he made, but also the mindset of the tribe, encouraging patience, consideration, and thoughtful action. As preparations began, tension lingered in the air. The warriors worked diligently, guided by Tayanita's leadership and Mika's advice. Yet, despite careful planning, uncertainty remained. No one could predict exactly what the neighboring group intended, and the possibility of sudden danger always loomed. In these moments, Tayanita felt the weight of his role more heavily than ever. Every action, every decision, had consequences that could ripple across the lives of his people. The responsibility was immense, but Mika's steady presence provided a measure of clarity and reassurance that he had not anticipated. The days that followed were filled with both routine and heightened alertness. Scouts moved along the edges of the territory, reporting observations back to the camp. Warriors practiced defensive formations, honed skills, and prepared for potential confrontations. Mika assisted wherever she could, analyzing patterns, noting potential weaknesses, and offering solutions that balanced caution with proactive measures. Her insight proved invaluable, and the tribe began to recognize the subtle but important role she played in their safety and preparedness. Despite these precautions, tension reached its peak one late afternoon. Scouts returned with news that the neighboring group had advanced closer than expected, approaching the boundaries of the tribe's land. The warriors assembled quickly, their movements precise, yet their faces reflected both concern and determination. Tayanita called a council, bringing together his advisors and Mika to assess the situation and plan their response. The discussion was intense, with each member contributing insights, strategies, and warnings. The atmosphere was charged with urgency, yet Mika remained calm, her observations precise and her suggestions carefully considered. It was during this council that Mika made a choice that would forever change her position in the camp. She proposed a plan that required courage, quick thinking, and trust in the warrior's abilities. Rather than waiting passively for the outsider's actions, she suggested a proactive approach that involved positioning scouts, creating strategic diversions, and guiding the tribe's movements to minimize risk. Her plan required careful coordination and confidence in the tribe's skills, but it promised a resolution that avoided unnecessary confrontation while securing the tribe's safety. Tayanita listened closely, aware that her proposal carried both opportunity and risk. He recognized that the plan would require trust, coordination, and bravery. And in that moment, he realized the depth of Mika's courage. She was willing to place herself in a position of vulnerability to protect the tribe and ensure a successful outcome. Her actions were selfless, thoughtful, and courageous, a combination that had quietly become her defining strength. The plan was set into motion. Warriors moved with precision, following Mika's guidance and Tayanita's leadership. Scouts observed the approaching group, relaying information back to the camp. Strategic diversions were enacted, guiding the outsiders away from critical areas, while Mika worked alongside the chief to coordinate movements, anticipate challenges, and provide solutions to unexpected developments. The day unfolded with tension, skill, and careful strategy, each moment requiring attention and courage. As the sun began to set, the results of Mika's plan became clear. The tribe had successfully managed the situation, protecting their territory without unnecessary conflict. Her guidance had prevented potential harm, preserved resources, and ensured the safety of the tribe. The warriors, initially cautious, now recognized her value, understanding that her courage, intelligence, and insight had contributed directly to the tribe's success. Tayanita, witnessing her actions, felt a mixture of pride, admiration, and humility. The prisoner who had once been a symbol of vulnerability had become an essential part of the tribe's strength. In the quiet moments after the events of the day, the chief reflected on the transformation that had occurred. Mika's influence had grown steadily, not through force or manipulation, but through consistent wisdom, courage, and empathy. She had demonstrated that true strength was not measured solely by physical skill or authority, but by insight, patience, and the willingness to act selflessly when it mattered most. For Tayanita, this realization was both inspiring and humbling. Mika, too, reflected on the day's events. She understood that her actions had changed the perception of her within the tribe. No longer simply a prisoner, she was recognized as a guide, a protector, and a source of courage. Yet she remained grounded, aware that trust was fragile and that continued vigilance, respect, and careful judgment were necessary. She had acted decisively, yet her motivation was always the well-being of the tribe and the protection of its people, not personal recognition or reward. The bond between Tayanita and Mika, though still unspoken, had deepened. The chief's respect for her had grown into trust, and her influence had become an undeniable force within the tribe. The events of the day had demonstrated that her courage and intelligence could alter outcomes in profound ways, and Tayanita recognized that her presence was now essential to the strength and resilience of his people. As the night settled over the plains, the camp was quiet except for the crackling of the fires. The warriors rested, the children slept peacefully, and the elders reflected on the lessons of the day. Mika and Tayanita stood near the fire, speaking softly about what had transpired, sharing observations, and considering the challenges that might come next. Their conversation was filled with thoughtfulness, respect, and a growing understanding of each other's strengths, limitations, and perspectives. The plains stretched endlessly under the stars, their vastness a reminder of the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. The tribe had faced uncertainty, and through courage, intelligence, and careful coordination, they had navigated it successfully. Yet, Tayanita knew that this was only the beginning. The events of the day had revealed both the potential of Mika's influence and the vulnerabilities inherent in trusting another. They had succeeded, but the future would require continued vigilance, wisdom, and courage from all members of the tribe. Mika's actions had proven that even those who began as outsiders could become essential to the strength and survival of a community. Her bravery had not only protected the tribe, but had reshaped perceptions, built trust, and established her as a key figure in the camp. And for Tayanita, the experience had revealed a truth he had long known, but rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. True strength often comes from recognizing the value of others, even when it challenges pride, authority, or expectation. As the fires burned low and the night deepened, the chief and his prisoner-turned ally looked toward the horizon. The plains were vast, full of challenges yet to come, and rich with opportunities for growth, learning, and connection. The events of the day had been transformative, demonstrating the power of courage, intelligence, and trust. And in that quiet moment beneath the stars, it was clear that the tribe's future, and the bond between Tayanita and Mika, would never be the same again. The morning sun rose over the vast plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The camp was alive with activity, though a quiet tension lingered in the air. The events of the previous days had changed the rhythm of the tribe, bringing lessons, victories, and new understanding. Warriors moved with purpose, children played under the watchful eyes of elders, and the fires burned brightly as preparations for the day began. Yet beneath this routine, the sense of something significant was growing, a realization that the tribe's strength was no longer measured solely by the might of its warriors, but also by the courage, intelligence, and dedication of someone who had once been a prisoner. Mika had spent the night considering the challenges that lay ahead. Her mind, sharp and attentive, reviewed the positions of the scouts, the readiness of the warriors, and the potential movements of the neighboring group. Though the previous confrontation had been successfully managed, she understood that threats could appear at any moment, and preparation was essential. Her calm presence inspired confidence among the warriors, and her careful planning had become an invaluable part of the tribe's resilience. She moved through the camp quietly, offering guidance where needed, ensuring that supplies were in order, and observing every detail with the precision that had come to define her influence. Tayanita, standing near the edge of the camp and watching the plains stretch endlessly, felt a mixture of pride, caution, and curiosity. The chief had come to rely on Mika's wisdom, recognizing her insight as a strength that complemented his own leadership. Yet he was also aware of the vulnerability that came with this reliance. Trusting someone outside the tribe, someone who had once been a prisoner, was not without risk. But over time, Tayanita had learned to value her judgment, her courage, and her dedication, not simply because they benefited the tribe, but because they revealed qualities of strength and character that he had long respected, even if he had not initially admitted it. As the day progressed, scouts returned with urgent news. The neighboring group, whose movements had been carefully monitored, was approaching faster than expected. Their intentions remained uncertain, but the proximity demanded action. Tayanita immediately called a council, bringing together his advisors and Mika to assess the situation and plan the tribe's response. The atmosphere was charged with tension, each person aware of the potential consequences of missteps or hesitation. Voices rose in concern and speculation, yet Mika remained calm, observing, analyzing, and considering solutions that balanced caution with proactive action. It was during this council that Mika made a decision that would forever redefine her role in the tribe. She proposed a daring plan, one that required precise coordination, trust in the warrior's abilities, and courage beyond what most would attempt. Instead of waiting for the outsiders to act, she suggested that a small group of warriors, guided by her knowledge of the terrain and the neighboring group's patterns, move strategically to intercept potential threats. The plan also included provisions for the safety of the tribe's elders, children, and supplies, ensuring that the community remained secure no matter what unfolded. Tayanita listened carefully, weighing the risks and benefits of her proposal. He recognized the brilliance and bravery of her plan, but also the danger it entailed. Executing it successfully would require absolute trust in the warriors and unwavering focus on the strategy she had outlined. And yet, the chief also saw the potential for growth, both for the tribe and for the bonds of trust that had developed between him and Mika. Her courage and foresight had already influenced the tribe's success in small ways. Now, it would be tested on a larger scale. The plan was put into action. Warriors moved with precision, guided by Mika's insights and Tayanita's leadership. Scouts reported positions and movements with accuracy, following the paths that had been carefully chosen. Strategic diversions were created to lead potential threats away from the tribe's core, while Mika worked alongside the chief to coordinate the movements, anticipate challenges, and offer solutions as new situations arose. The tension was palpable, but the tribe moved with unity, each member aware that their success depended on cooperation, trust, and courage. As the afternoon progressed, Mika's leadership became even more evident. She anticipated obstacles, adjusted strategies on the fly, and encouraged the warriors with quiet confidence. Her knowledge of the terrain allowed the small group to navigate the plains efficiently, avoiding unnecessary conflict while guiding potential threats away from critical areas. Tayanita watched her in awe, realizing that the prisoner who had once been considered a vulnerability had become the tribe's greatest asset. Her bravery and intelligence had not only influenced outcomes, but had also inspired trust, respect, and confidence throughout the camp. The climax of the day arrived when the neighboring group, unaware of the careful strategy, approached a ridge near the tribe's territory. Mika, observing their movements, quickly coordinated the warriors to create a diversion that drew attention away from the tribe's main camp. She positioned scouts and guided the warriors with precision, ensuring that no harm came to anyone. Her actions were decisive, courageous, and perfectly timed. The neighboring group, seeing the strategic placement of the warriors and the diversionary movements, chose to withdraw, avoiding confrontation altogether. The success of Mika's plan brought a sense of relief, pride, and celebration to the tribe. The warriors returned to the camp, the elders expressed gratitude, and even the children sensed the triumph of careful planning and bravery. Tayanita approached Mika, his expression reflecting a mixture of admiration, respect, and personal recognition. He realized that her influence had been critical to the tribe's safety, that her courage had prevented potential harm, and that her intelligence had guided them to success. The prisoner who had once been a symbol of vulnerability had become the source of the tribe's greatest strength. In the quiet moments after the day's events, Tayanita and Mika reflected together. They spoke softly, sharing observations and insights, discussing what had transpired and considering the lessons learned. Their bond, though still unspoken in formal terms, had reached a level of mutual understanding and trust that few could achieve. Tayanita acknowledged the depth of her courage and wisdom, and Mika recognized the chief's openness, humility, and willingness to value the insight of another. Together, they had faced uncertainty, navigated challenges, and emerged stronger as individuals and as leaders within the tribe. The evening brought a sense of calm and reflection. Fires burned brightly in the camp, casting long shadows across the plains, while the stars above glimmered in a vast, infinite sky. The warriors rested, children slept peacefully, and the elders contemplated the lessons of the day. Mika and Tayanita stood together near the largest fire, looking out over the plains, their thoughts aligned in a shared understanding of what had been accomplished and what lay ahead. Their connection was no longer defined by prisoner and chief, but by mutual respect, courage, and the shared experience of leadership in the face of uncertainty. The events of the day had left a lasting impact on the tribe. Mika's actions had proven that true strength often comes from unexpected sources, and that courage, intelligence, and insight are just as valuable as physical skill or authority. The warriors, inspired by her bravery and guidance, began to see the importance of observation, planning, and careful decision-making. Even the elders, initially skeptical, recognized the value of her contributions and began to incorporate her insights into future planning and guidance for the tribe. For Tayanita, the lessons were deeply personal. He had come to understand that true leadership is not defined by solitary strength alone, but by the ability to recognize and embrace the talents, courage, and wisdom of others. Mika had shown him that influence could be gentle yet powerful, that guidance could come without force, and that courage often revealed itself in quiet, thoughtful action rather than grand gestures. Her presence had reshaped his understanding of leadership, trust, and the possibilities that lay ahead for the tribe. As the night deepened, the camp settled into a peaceful rhythm. The plains were quiet, the wind soft, and the fires burned low, casting a gentle glow on the faces of those resting nearby. Mika and Tayanita, standing together, reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a simple act of captivity had evolved into a story of courage, trust, and transformation. The prisoner had become an ally, a guide, and a source of strength, proving that even in challenging circumstances, integrity, intelligence, and bravery could change the course of events. The bond between them, forged through shared challenges and mutual respect, promised a future filled with possibilities. The tribe had faced uncertainty and emerged stronger, guided by the combined wisdom and courage of their leaders. Mika's influence, once questioned, was now celebrated, and Tayanita had come to appreciate the profound impact of her presence. The plains stretched endlessly before them, a reminder that life would continue to bring both challenges and opportunities, and that together they could face whatever came with confidence, resilience, and understanding. In the final moments of the day, Tayanita turned to Mika and spoke softly, expressing his gratitude, admiration, and acknowledgement of her courage. Mika, in return, responded with humility, recognizing that her role had been guided by respect for the tribe, the chief, and the values they shared. The moment was quiet, profound, and transformative, a culmination of trust, courage, and the unspoken bond that had grown between them. The plains, vast and enduring, bore witness to a story of courage, wisdom, and unexpected alliances. The tribe had learned that strength comes in many forms, that leadership requires both authority and empathy, and that the most remarkable transformations often arise from the unlikeliest of circumstances. Mika's journey from prisoner to trusted ally had not only shaped the fate of the tribe, but had also revealed the power of trust, respect, and courage in forging lasting bonds. As the stars twinkled above, casting a serene light over the camp, the story reached its quiet conclusion. The tribe was safe, the warriors inspired, and the future filled with hope. Tayanita and Mika had both grown, individually and together, and their shared experience would remain a guiding force for the tribe in the days, months, and years to come. What had begun as captivity had transformed into a partnership built on mutual respect, courage, and wisdom, a story that would be remembered and celebrated as an example of the extraordinary power of trust, insight, and bravery.